Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for that lunch, which was much appreciated, and thank you for staying on. I have to say at the beginning that I'm not an archaeologist. I'm an historian, and there is a big difference between the two, although in many ways the disciplines of our respective subjects are quite similar. We both rely very much on evidence, and we evaluate that evidence and we draw conclusions from that evidence. Okay, I'll say a bit more later on. So, it seems to me that when we start looking at this subject, we need to work out what archaeology is and whether it proves the Bible true. So archaeology itself, the word comes from two Greek words, archaeos, from which we get archaic, like me, and logos, which means word, matter, or account. So archaeology is to do with old stuff. That's an easy way to remember it. Do we rely on it to prove the Bible true? No, for a number of reasons. Archaeology is not an exact science. There are gaps in the archaeological record. I explained it earlier as rather like trying to do a jigsaw puzzle, a big 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle without a picture and with half the bits missing. So how do you know what goes where? It doesn't really make sense. And that's part of the problem that archaeologists have, is trying to fit the evidence that they find into an unknown whole. Well, it's unknown as far as they're concerned anyway. And the other reason why we don't rely on archaeology to prove the Bible true is that because it's an inexact science, it wouldn't prove it anyway. It might strongly support it, but archaeologists can and do disagree with each other. In fact, archaeologists can and do go round in circles, as you'll see when we look at the particular case study that we're going to look at. So the whole point of this introduction is to say, look, it's interesting to look at the archaeology. It can be comforting to look at the archaeology, but we don't rely on what archaeologists have to say to believe what there is written in the Bible. Because the Bible is God's infallible word, and archaeologists are fallible. Okay. So, the thing that we're going to look at particularly, I'm going to ask Bob to come forward and read the relevant chapter for us now, is something which many skeptics think of as myth, fairy tale, the Battle of Jericho.
Right, we're reading from Joshua chapter 6. Was it 7? 7. 6, sorry. So I wasted my time reading chapter 7 earlier. Right, Joshua chapter 6. Now Jericho was straitly shut up because of the children of Israel. None went out and none came in. And the Lord said unto Joshua, See, I have given into thine hand Jericho, and the king thereof, and the mighty men of valour. And ye shall compass the city, all ye men of war, and go round about the city once. Thus shalt thou do 6 days. And 7 priests shall bear before the ark 7 trumpets of ram's horns. And the 7th day ye shall compass the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow with the trumpets. And it shall come to pass that when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, and when ye hear the sound of the trumpet, all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city shall fall down flat, and the people shall ascend up every man straight before him. And Joshua the son of Nun called the priests and said unto them, Take up the ark of the covenant, and let 7 priests bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of the Lord. And he said unto the people, Pass on and compass the city, and let him that is armed pass on before the ark of the Lord. And it came to pass, when Joshua had spoken unto the people, that the 7 priests bearing the 7 trumpets of ram's horns passed on before the Lord, and blew with the trumpets, and the ark of the covenant of the Lord followed them. And the armed men went before the priests that blew with the trumpets, and the rear ward came after the ark, the priests going on and blowing with the trumpets. And Joshua had commanded the people, saying, Ye shall not shout, nor make any noise with your voice, neither shall any word proceed out of your mouth, until the day I bid you shout. Then shall you shout. So the ark of the Lord compassed the city, going about it once, and they came into the camp and lodged in the camp. And Joshua rose early in the morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord. And 7 priests bearing 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of the Lord went on continually, and blew with the trumpets. And the armed men went before them, but the rear ward came after the ark of the Lord, the priests going on and blowing with the trumpets. And the second day they compassed the city once, and returned into the camp. So they did 6 days. And it came to pass on the 7th day that they rose up early, about the dawning of the day, and compassed the city after the same manner 7 times. Only on that day they compassed the city 7 times. And it came to pass at the 7th time, when the priests blew with the trumpets, Joshua said unto the people, Shout, for the Lord hath given you the city. And the city shall be accursed, even it and all that are therein, to the Lord. Only Rahab the harlot shall live, she and all that are with her in the house, because she hid the messengers that we sent. And ye in any wise keep yourselves from the accursed thing, lest ye make yourselves accursed, when ye take up the accursed thing and make the camp of Israel accursed and trouble it. But all the silver and gold and vessels of brass and iron are consecrated unto the Lord. They shall come into the treasury of the Lord. So the people shouted when the priests blew with the trumpets, and it came to pass, when the people heard the sound of the trumpet, and the people shouted with a great shout, that the wall fell down flat, so that the people went up into the city, every man straight before him, and they took the city. And they utterly destroyed all that was in the city, both man and woman, young and old, and ox and sheep and ass, with the edge of the sword. But Joshua had said unto the 2 men that had spied out the country, Go into the harlot's house, and bring out thence the woman and all that she hath, as ye swear unto her. And the young men that were spies went in and brought out Rahab and her father and her mother and her brethren and all that she had. They brought out all her kindred and left them without the camp of Israel. And they burnt the city with fire and all that was therein. Only the silver and the gold and the vessels of brass and of iron they put into the treasury of the house of the Lord. And Joshua saved Rahab the harlot alive, and her father's household, and all that she had. And she dwelleth in Israel even unto this day, because she hid the messengers which Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. And Joshua adjured them at that time, saying, Cursed be the man before the Lord that riseth up and buildeth this city Jericho. He shall lay the foundation thereof in his firstborn, and in his youngest son shall he set up the gates of it. So the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame was noised throughout the country.
I know you know the story, but I think it's worthwhile having it there right in front of us because we're going to focus on some of the detail. So, I'm sure you also know where Jericho is, but there we are, marked in blue, down by the Jordan. Tel Es Sultan is another name for the site. It's 820 feet below sea level. I don't know what that is in metres, but I'm sure you're all of an age that understands feet, just like I do. It's a long way down. It is, in fact, the lowest city on Earth, so far as I'm aware. And it was first excavated some time ago. Let's finish this. The site is dated, or the site that has been investigated is dated around 1500 BC. It comprises around 10 acres, possibly had a population of around 1500, and crucially, it had a powerful spring. Now, in an area which was pretty arid, that was a very important factor, probably the determining factor upon the original siting of the settlement. Now, when I say about 1500 BC, I'll be a bit more precise shortly, but that immediately raises issues with some of the archaeology that has been conducted on the site. So, here we are. It's not a particularly attractive looking site, but it's a classic illustration of the benefits and the frustrations of studying archaeology alongside the Bible. Here's an aerial view which perhaps makes it easier to appreciate. It was first, so far as I'm aware, it was first excavated between about 1907 and 1911 by a couple of Germans called Ernst Sellin and Karl Watzinger. And the dating that they came up with is quite interesting. They placed it somewhere around 1400 BC. Bear that in mind. They did lack modern dating methodology, but that doesn't mean to say that they were wrong. In the 1930s, an English archaeologist called John Garstang also explored the area and uncovered a collapsed double city wall, which he dated as late Bronze Age, around 1400 BC. Now, these walls were very impressive. I need to go forward. There we go. We get a bit of a clue about the size of the walls here. They're very impressive. That's even better indication of the sort of structure that they had. They would have made any frontal attack on them extraordinarily difficult. There was an outer retaining wall which held in place this glacis, which was at an angle of 35 degrees. Now, if that doesn't make an awful lot of sense to you, that's pretty steep. There's an area of cliff near Bridport in Dorset, which is somewhere around the same angle of climb, and I had to go up on all fours. So it's quite difficult. And then at the top of that, if you get up that, there's another city wall, and not only is there a wall, but altogether, the outer wall, the glacis, and the inner wall, that's about 24 metres. That's quite thick. The outer wall was about 4 metres high, the upper parapet about 7 metres high and 3 metres thick at its base. So this, we're talking about very, very serious defences here. Now, on the south side of the city, there was a gate, a fortified gate, And that's quite interesting because the fact that it was fortified in the way that it was, and the fact that it was on the south side of the city, perhaps indicates where most travel into the city came from, and perhaps also where the greatest area of threat came from, or perceived threat, which may well have been Egypt. Okay? On the north side, there were houses built into the wall. That's a better, it's easier for you to follow, it's a schematic. There were houses built into the wall. Now, I've gone through all of those quite quickly, so I'm going to just go back a bit. Sorry, gone the wrong way. And we'll pick it up here for the moment. Now, alongside and overlaying the remains of the walls was evidence of major destruction and abandonment of the site. Therefore, Garstang concluded that this was the work of Joshua and his followers. As I said, I think in many ways Garstang was right. Now, some 20 years later, another English archaeologist called Kathleen Kenyon came along, carried out her own excavations, and concluded that the true date of Jericho's fall must have been at the end of the Middle Bronze Age, at least 100, probably more like 200 years before Garstang said that this happened. Now, because she also placed the exodus of the children of Israel in the reign of Ramses II, this meant, in fact, that if the dating of the remains is correct, the city would already have been a ruin by the time Joshua arrived. And therefore, it must have been attacked by the Egyptians. This was her thinking. And essentially, her interpretation remained unchallenged until after her death in 1978. Now, there's a problem for us, isn't it, in terms of support or otherwise of the biblical account. But it does indicate, doesn't it, very, very clearly how archaeologists don't always agree with each other. Now, why does the date matter? I've already suggested that if we take Kenyon's idea, it's already in a ruin before Joshua arrives. But Kenyon's dating of the Exodus is, I believe, wrong. It's wrong, not least of all, because the Bible says it's wrong. 1 Kings 6 and verse 1, we can date pretty accurately when the Exodus took place, which was in the mid-1440s BC. So Garstang's date was much more on the ball. And it is, incidentally, a date which is now agreed with by a number of modern archaeologists. What Garstang and Kenyon found that was particularly interesting, and where their conclusions were in common in a way, was that the houses were stocked with storage jars full of grain. Now that's interesting. What do we make of that? Whatever caused the fall of the city, it was not starvation. Now, although Jericho was based on a spring of water, it wasn't in a strategically or economically important position so far as the Egyptians were concerned. Okay? And Kenyon's idea that Jericho was attacked by the Egyptians is shown to be nonsense, really, by the presence of these full jars of grain. Because Egyptians tended to attack just before the grain harvest. And they did that so that they deprived the people in the city of food, and they had plenty themselves. outside the city of this now ripe harvest. Furthermore, when the Egyptians took over a city, they didn't tend to destroy it, they tended to colonise it. And in this particular case, there were very good reasons for colonising it. It was well fortified and it had that spring of water. None of those things appear to have taken place. The place was a ruin. So that's interesting. What's also interesting is that that certainly Kenyon noted that, and I'm going to quote her here, so I need my glasses, the destruction was complete. Walls and floors were blackened or reddened by fire, and every room was filled with fallen bricks, timbers, and household utensils. In most rooms, the fallen debris was heavily burned, but the collapse of the walls of the eastern rooms seems to have taken place before they were affected by fire. Now again, as you read through Joshua 6, that's really important, because what was the order in which things happened according to the biblical record? Well, the walls fell down and then the children of Israel went in. So, for all sorts of reasons, I don't think it was the Egyptians that were responsible for the destruction of Jericho. So, who was? We need to look at the evidence. It doesn't really make very much sense from a military or almost any other standpoint for a victorious army to treat the city in the way that it appears to have been treated. They left all the city's grain. That's why the archaeologists could find it. They didn't settle on a site that had that very good water supply, about 18 gallons a second, apparently, comes out of the spring. So whoever took the city had very good reason for looking that particular gift horse in the mouth. So to clarify that it really was Joshua who fought the Battle of Jericho, we can re-examine the archaeological evidence. I've already alluded to one of the bits that I think is absolutely key. The collapse of the walls appears to have taken place before they were affected by fire. So, as we read in chapter 6, the record tells us how the spies had been sent out to report on the strength of the defences, and at that point the walls were intact. And actually we have to go back to chapter 2 for that, so just keep a finger in chapter 6 if you've got it there. So chapter 2 and verse 8. Now before they lay down, she, that is Rahab, came up to them on the roof, it's the spies being the them, and said to the men, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land are faint-hearted because of you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the two kings of the Amorites, who were on the other side of the Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. So it appears that the sort of psychological battle was won already. And incidentally, it makes it absolutely clear that the crossing of the Red Sea was a historical fact, one of which the surrounding tribes would have known. They could scarcely help but know, because of course it destroyed a large part of the Egyptian army. So, if chapter 6 tells us how the city fell, how the walls came tumbling down, there we go, walls came tumbling down. It must really have been those walls that Garstang and Canaan found wrecked. Now, some scholars who still cling to the idea that Kenyon's dating is correct have problems with the dating, but as I've said, a number of scholars now think that around 1400 BC is correct. And what does the record in the Bible actually tell us, and how does that fit with the evidence? Again, we need to go back just before chapter 6 to chapter 5 and verse 10. Now the children of Israel camped in Gilgal and kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month at twilight on the plains of Jericho, and they ate of the produce of the land on the day after the Passover, unleavened bread and parched grain on the very same day. So how does that fit in? They ate of the produce of the land. This was harvest time, not the time of year that the Egyptians would necessarily have come. The harvest was in. They could eat of the produce of the land. The people, of course, were forbidden to plunder by Joshua, and indeed curses were to come upon those who attempted to rebuild it on top of that. So if they were forbidden to plunder, that helps to explain why the grain was still there. Why did it stay a ruin when it was a good defensible site with a good supply of water? Because the children of Israel were told not to live there, to leave it alone, to leave it as a ruin. Now, I think that put that together with the archaeological evidence, it makes quite a compelling case. The evidence of the collapsed walls, archaeologists don't like to accredit events to the power of Almighty God, but they ought. They suggest that the collapsed walls has led some scholars have suggested that some form of earthquake may also have caused not only the collapse of the walls, but also a temporary blockage of the Jordan further north at Adam, or Jazir Ed Damieh, and that this allowed the Israelites to cross over the river as described in chapter 3. Now, they're in the wrong chronological order for that to make sense. They're just desperate to come up with what they think is a reasonable explanation. But what is interesting about that, where they crossed, is that nearby there were deposits of flint. And that matches with Joshua 5 verse 2, when Joshua told the Israelites to make flint knives and circumcise the sons of Israel. And if we're not too clued up with the sort of technology of the day, they had metal knives, but these weren't anywhere near as effective as flint knives, in fact. And so suggesting that they used flint knives, which were much sharper and which happened to be there at the point where they crossed the Jordan, is, I think, to put it mildly, interesting. Now, David Roll, I'm sure you've heard of, had no problem with the dates, because he places the invasion of Canaan between 1440 and 1353. That's the whole invasion of Canaan. Now, I don't see any reason to disagree too much with what he said. Even some who don't agree with Roll's so-called new chronology are impressed by the findings of a pottery specialist called Bryant Wood. He's an American. And radiocarbon dating of fragments from the destruction layer, which come out at about 1410. Now, there are some who don't like the idea of what Bryant Wood has to say, because he's known to favour the biblical record. But I think what's interesting about Roll is that he went first to the archaeology, and what does the archaeology say? And then he went to the Bible, and lo and behold, it fits. Whereas what others have done is they've gone to the Bible first and then tried to sort of squeeze it into what they thought the archaeology said. And it doesn't work. So we had that picture of the ark being taken round the outskirts of the city. Interestingly, the artist who painted this, we're back in the sort of Middle Ages, it's a European city on a flat plain, which doesn't quite fit, but it's interesting. And here they are, blowing their trumpets on the way round the wall. And our final piece of evidence is this rather unprepossessing looking clay tablet. It's part of what has been called the Amarna letters. They were found near El Amarna in Egypt in 1887. And they contain, believe it or not, I can't read this myself, I haven't got a clue what it says, but I'm reliably informed that what it actually says is that it's a report from a man called Sherwodatta, who was responsible for the area around Hebron to the Egyptian king Akhenaten, complaining that he has been left to deal with the troublesome Habiru on his own. Now, is it too much of a coincidence that he's referring to the Hebrews or Habiru? It was precisely the area and at the same time that the biblical record indicates. There's one more thing that we might say. Is critics say, well, if they, given that they conquered Jericho, there's precious little evidence, archaeologically speaking, of the people of Israel being in the land at this time. Very little evidence. Well, there's a simple answer to that, is that although they took the Canaanite towns, they didn't live in them. And both before and after, they spent some time living in tents. And if you want evidence 3,500 years from now that once upon a time you pitched a tent in your garden, I'll suggest you won't find it. So, I think if you put that together with what the various archaeologists have had to say, it makes quite a compelling case that it really was Joshua who fought the Battle of Jericho. The walls really did come tumbling down, and then the children of Israel destroyed the city, even leaving the grain, because they were forbidden to plunder. They burnt it, and it remained unsettled for many years. The Bible tells us all of that. And the evidence of the archaeology strongly points towards that. So what conclusions do we come to? Well, here's an Israeli archaeologist, Avram Biram, who says archaeology isn't here to prove or disprove the Bible. Absolutely right. That's not the purpose of archaeology. His second sentence is interesting. What archaeology does is make the references in the Bible a reality. It gives those references some bones and flesh. I think that's how we need to approach it. It's very comforting to us when the findings of archaeologists seem to support what the Bible says. But we have to be aware that there may come another generation of archaeologists afterwards who contradict what today's archaeologists are saying. And the Bible doesn't need archaeology to support its claim to be true, because we know that it is the inspired word of God. But for you and me, how do we view this? Well, I take great comfort from it. There are so many coincidences in the available archaeological evidence. You know, when does circumstantial evidence become compelling? When there's enough of it. And I think there's plenty to support the biblical record of the Battle of Jericho. Thank you.